All right, it's weird lighting day here in Las Vegas. It is Friday, I believe May 16th. Let's talk about the Supreme Court hearing yesterday that kind of tangentially involved birthright citizenship, but primarily was about district court levels, federal trial courts being able to issue nationwide injunctions. And, you know, during Donald Trump's first term, both sides gamed this thing. In Donald Trump's first term, there were a bunch of lawsuits about certain things that were filed in the district court in San Francisco. That is happening again during his second term. I know that there's at least one federal judge, Judge Susan Ilston, who I've had cases in front of, who is hearing a case right now and I think getting ready to make a decision about some of these mass layoffs that the Trump administration has been doing. During the Biden administration, Republicans flocked to the federal court in the Northern District of Texas, I think it's in Amarillo, and got their nationwide injunctions from a Trump-appointed judge named Matthew Kacsmaryk. He initially issued a nationwide injunction against the sale and distribution of abortion medication mifepristone. So this is something that both sides do, depending on who's in the Oval Office and what their policies are. Obviously, during Trump's second term, these kinds of issues take on a much greater importance, given just the absolute flood and river of constitutionally unsound gibberish that is coming from the Oval Office these days. The perfect example of that is the issue of birthright citizenship, which again was not what was primarily being discussed during oral arguments yesterday, but that's the context in which this issue came up. And, you know, Trump humpers and the mouth-breathing MAGA chuds are like, the explicit argument that John Sauer, the Solicitor General, made in court was that the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship only applies to the offspring of slaves. Yeah. He said that out loud. And that's one of my favorite things about our current environment over the last 110 days or so, is that attorneys for the Department of Justice and attorneys like Solicitor General John Sauer are going before the court, before all federal courts, and making arguments and saying things out loud that cause people who possess even a modicum of common sense to just say, holy shitballs, I can't believe that they just said that out loud. Saying that the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, only applies to the offspring of slaves is an objectively insane argument to make. There's over 100 years worth of precedent that disagrees with this administration, from liberal courts, from conservative courts, from liberal judges, from conservative judges. If you are born within the boundaries of the United States, you are a United States citizen. That is also the plain language of the beginning of the 14th Amendment. It doesn't say anywhere in there, this section only applies to the offspring of slaves who are born in the United States. It's just completely insane. Anyway, but that's not what the substance of the oral argument was about yesterday. Regardless, leading up to oral arguments, Donald Trump, of course, completely lost his mud on Truth Social. And he wrote, big case today in the United States Supreme Court. Birthright citizenship was not meant for people taking vacations to become permanent citizens of the United States of America and bringing their families with them, all the time laughing at the suckers, all caps, that we are. The United States of America is the only country in the world that does this for whatever reason. Nobody knows, but the drug cartels love it. He added, "We are, for the sake of being politically correct, a stupid," again, all caps, country. It's so nice that the President of the United States describes the United States as a stupid country. But in actuality, this is the exact opposite of being politically correct, and is yet another point that leads to blah, 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 blah. Birthright citizenship is about the babies of slaves. Oh, check. Thanks. I mean, what was underlying these oral arguments is the plain fact that Donald Trump's executive order overturning part of the Constitution and saying that birthright citizenship no longer applies is stupid. That's so obviously, blatantly, flagrantly stupid, unconstitutional, and illegal that every single lower court that has heard birthright citizenship executive order on its substance has said, no, this is wildly illegal and unconstitutional. Conservative judges and liberal judges alike have been consistent on that point. And so that's what's underlying this whole thing. And because it's clear and plain in its language in the Constitution, the analogy that I've been kind of coming up with in my own head is, because this is exactly what Trump and conservatives are arguing for, that the President of the United States has the power to overturn a section of the Constitution and do away with it, or has the power to eradicate an amendment to the Bill of Rights. And if you're looking for an analogy to use with your Trump-humping friends and relatives, just say to them, here's what Donald Trump is arguing in favor of. Here's what you are arguing in favor of. If Kamala Harris had won the election, you are saying that she could have issued an executive order saying that the Second Amendment is illegal and doing away with the Second Amendment, and see how they like that. That is exactly what they are arguing in favor of. It's, people like to say that Donald Trump is a strategic thinker. He's not, nor are the attorneys who are working in his administration. He has not hired a single attorney who is giving him actual, objective legal advice. He has hired people for their ideological loyalty to him, period. Go make this argument. Done. Happy to do it. I will do that, even though, under any normal times, if I were to do that, I would probably lose my bar license. That's what they're doing now. They are arguing that Kamala Harris, if she would have won the election, would be able to do away with the Second Amendment and all of its rights and protections through an executive order. That's exactly what they're arguing for. The oral arguments, shall we say, so John Sauer has been an appellate attorney for Donald Trump for a very long time. He argued the immunity case in front of the Supreme Court. And as a reward for those prior acts, Donald Trump has now appointed him to be Solicitor General for the United States of America. He is the lead attorney who argues on behalf of the United States in front of the United States Supreme Court. The 4 justices on the court who are women shredded him, absolutely shredded him, including Amy Coney Barrett. They shredded him and made him look like an absolute clown, pointing out all of the inconsistencies in his arguments, all of the stupid, unimaginable, dumb consequences of his arguments, and what the outcomes would be if the court were to side with the Trump administration on this question. Amy Coney Barrett jumped in a couple of times when Justice Elena Kagan was questioning John Sauer, and to support Elena Kagan, basically saying because Elena Kagan would ask him a question, he wouldn't answer it. John Sauer is extremely good at one thing, using lots of legalese and case sites and things like that, and stringing together these incredibly erudite sentences that appear to have a very high level of federal law understanding, education, and being able to navigate that world extremely well and intelligently, when in reality he's making bullshit, dumb, stupid arguments that would have disastrous consequences if the court were to agree with him. But he sure sounds smart. That's John Sauer in a nutshell. And there were a couple of, like, there was one time when Kagan asked him a question and he gave a very long, because one point that Justice Kagan made was, let's operate from the assumption that you're completely wrong on the executive order itself, which we're not really dealing with today, but that's why we're here. Every lower court has found it to be unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional on its face because it's the president trying to eradicate part of the Constitution. The president does not have the power to do that. And she's like, let's just assume that you're wrong. How are we supposed to get to a point where we can get to the right result in saying this is unconstitutional without the ability of a trial court to issue this kind of a nationwide injunction? And here's the answer that he gave. Well, that would be a profoundly wrong result, but I think what I would offer is that, very similar to another case, what the court should be engaging here is a balancing of the equitable factors as to the scope of remedial relief, not as to the underlying merits. And our contention that this exceeds the traditional scope of equity that's reflected in the 1789 Judiciary Act, we're overwhelmingly likely to succeed on the merits for all the reasons that are stated in our brief. Justice Elena Kagan responded, yes, I mean, that's a lot of words, and I still don't have an answer for my question. That's about how the day went for John Sauer. A bunch of experts were like, this is ridiculous. This is an absolute bloodbath. One commentator was like, yes, Chief Justice Roberts, I'd like to report a murder. Can you please put an end to this right now? But so it's like, so Amy Coney Barrett ended up really boxing in the government and boxing John Sauer into a corner, because, you know, what John Sauer was saying, well, these people who would lose their citizenship, which would be every single one of us, if birthright citizenship does not exist and is taken away, every single person in the United States loses their United States citizenship. Every single one, including every single person who voted for Donald Trump. They don't think through to that point either, the MAGA chuds. They're like, I'm white, I would still have my citizenship. Where the fuck does it say that in the Constitution? You just did away with the section that says, if you're born here, you're a citizen. It doesn't say, if you're born here, you're a citizen, unless you're black or brown or have a funny name that's different than mine and are from a different country. That's not what the amendment says. If Donald Trump's executive order were to stand, every single person in the United States would lose their United States citizenship. Every single one of them. And John Sauer's response to that is like, well, each individual would have to file their own lawsuit against the United States government in the jurisdiction where they live. And Amy Coney Barrett was like, but are you saying that they couldn't even form a class for a class action lawsuit so that everybody in the United States who just lost their citizenship would be able to form a certified class of plaintiffs in one single lawsuit? And he was like, no, it would have to be state by state, and we would object to that, and we would fight that as well. And it's like the four women on the court were just like throwing their hands up, like, can you Can you believe this guy is saying this shit out loud? It was ridiculous. And so, of course, once Amy Coney Barrett did that in support of liberal Justice Elena Kagan, MAGA lost their minds because Amy Coney Barrett has been on the wrong side of decisions in the past. And they think that she is a plant. They think that she's really a liberal. They think that she is a traitor. And she now has heightened personal security for herself and her family because of all of the death threats that she has gotten from Trump supporters. Not from people on the left, from Trump supporters. Amy Coney Barrett on universal injunctions is currently showing her intellectual inadequacy. Better diligence on judicial appointments is warranted. Ratzo, whose Twitter account is littered with attacks on Muslims, wrote, "There is nothing worse than a traitor among us. Americans hate them with every fiber of their being. Justices Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts are such people." So it's just the whole thing was stupid. And surprisingly, Brett Kavanaugh asked him a series of questions that dealt with the issue that they were not dealing with yesterday. He says, this is just a very practical question. How is this going to work if we no longer have birthright citizenship in the United States? What do hospitals do with a newborn? What do states do with a newborn? And Sauer replied, I don't think they do anything different. What the executive order says in Section 2 is that federal officials do not accept documents that have the wrong designation of citizenship from people who are subject to the executive order. Circular. All of that is decided by the president, and all of that is circular. And Kavanaugh says, well, how are they going to know that? Sauer said, the states can continue to, the federal officials will have to figure that out. How? Kavanaugh said. And Sauer's like, well, so you can imagine a number of ways that the federal official could, and he's like, such as, like what? And Sauer's like, well, such as they could require a showing of, documentation showing legal presence in the country. For a temporary visitor, for example, they could see whether they're here on an H-1B visa, which would exclude the birthright citizenship in that case. And at which point, a couple of the justices laughed out loud. And Kavanaugh was like, for every single newborn in the United States, how is that going to work? And he's like, well, again, we don't know, because the agencies were never given the opportunity to formulate the guidance. The guidance is the 14th Amendment. The guidance is the language that says, if you are born in the United States, you are a United States citizen. That's the guidance, John. Jesus. And then Amy Coney Barrett also grilled him hard on whether or not this administration believes that it needs to obey court orders. And John Sauer kept saying, well, generally we do. She's like, you keep saying generally. And he's like, well, there are certain circumstances where, we don't. But that's happened all the time. That's been happening for 100 years. She's like, example, please. She's like, I'm not talking about, the government bringing up a case or filing a brief that it's like the Supreme Court made this decision in 1945 and we think it should be overturned. I'm talking about, it's like you've just received 3 or 4 orders from lower federal courts in the last 2 months saying that this executive order is illegal and unconstitutional. What are you doing in response to those valid court orders? And he hemmed and hawed and had no answer. But essentially it's like Trump is focused on this issue of injunctions only as it relates to his executive order on birthright citizenship. He and John Sauer and MAGA are, again, like I said at the beginning, arguing that the President of the United States should have the power to overturn part of the Constitution And no federal trial court would be able to issue a nationwide injunction to prevent that from happening until that case made its way up to the Supreme Court. And it's insane. It's completely insane. But then it's like, you got to pay attention to this particular Supreme Court and the things that this particular Supreme Court has done over the last several years. And a lot of the things that this particular Supreme Court has done has been, they've got a pattern of overturning at least one major precedent each year, each session, whether it's overturn Roe versus Wade, overturn affirmative action, overturn the Chevron doctrine. That precedent means nothing to the 6 conservatives on this court. It means nothing. And that is horrific, because that has now given us a United States Supreme Court where it's like, we hear this argument, we hear this oral argument, and even by the end of the argument, we're sitting there, it's like, well, you've got the 4 female justices on one side, and you've got at least 4 of the male conservatives, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, maybe Kavanaugh, we're not sure yet, but Roberts didn't exhibit any problems with this. He didn't start any questioning with any grave concerns. So it's like, are we really going to have a 5-4 decision where the 5 is all men and the 4 is all women, taking away the right of federal trial courts to issue nationwide injunctions on these kinds of issues, constitutional issues that affect literally every single person who was born in the United States? And the 5 male justices are going to be like, no, we agree with the government that each one of those 340 million people is going to have to file their own individual lawsuit against the government. The consequences of this decision, if the court sides with Trump on this, I think are very, very challenging to even envision. But if they side with Trump, all of those consequences are going to be horrific and incredibly bad and negative. So, but, they argued this on May 15th, and, we should have their decision by the 4th of July. So, yay, Independence Day. See what happens.